Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters gathered outside Portland's ICE facility today. A demonstration outside the facility earlier with...
In the city of Portland, Oregon, tension is once again building between local leaders and the White House. President Trump has announced his intention to deploy National Guard troops to address what he calls an escalating crisis of lawlessness and violent crime in America's most progressive cities. But Portland's leadership is pushing back, insisting that federal involvement would only make things worse. What's unfolding here is not just another partisan argument, it's the collision of two worldviews, one demanding direct intervention to restore order, and another arguing that local autonomy and reform, not force, are the keys to progress. Yet, beneath the political noise, the people of Portland, business owners, families, and workers, are the ones living through the consequences. A city under strain. For years, Portland has been struggling to manage its rising rates of vandalism, theft, and public disorder. Once celebrated for its creativity and independent spirit, the city has in recent times become a symbol of unrest. Protests that began years ago around issues of racial justice and policing evolved into prolonged clashes between demonstrators and law enforcement. For residents and small business owners, the impact has been devastating. Windows stay boarded up, insurance premiums have skyrocketed, and entire neighborhoods live in a state of anxiety that rarely makes national headlines. The federal debate. President Trump has been blunt in his assessment. He believes local authorities have failed. His administration argues that the federal government has a responsibility to step in when city leadership cannot maintain public safety. Portland's mayor and governor, however, disagree. They claim the city is not war-torn and that military involvement is unnecessary. They say that the real solution lies in rebuilding trust between the community and local law enforcement, not by putting soldiers on the streets. Still, with violence and property crime continuing to rise, many ordinary residents feel that the debate over jurisdiction has done little to make their lives safer. The human toll. It's the everyday Portlander who feels the brunt of this crisis. Store owners open their shops in the morning, uncertain whether they'll be robbed before the day is done. Some have experienced multiple break-ins within months. Others have given up entirely, shutting their doors for good. One restaurant owner described being broken into for the 10th time, an experience that has left her anxious, exhausted, and on the verge of closing. "We need help," she said simply, her voice carrying the kind of fatigue that statistics can't convey. Behind every headline about crime or politics, there are human stories of perseverance, people trying to hold on to their livelihoods in a city they still love, even as it changes around them. A crisis of confidence. Many Portland residents now express frustration not only with the rise in crime, but with what they see as a lack of accountability. Critics argue that a combination of decriminalization policies and a revolving door justice system has left offenders with little incentive to change. They point out that those arrested for theft or vandalism are often released quickly, sometimes within hours, only to reoffend. The perception, fair or not, is that the city's legal system has tilted too far toward leniency, creating a cycle of repeat offenses that police can barely keep up with. The catch-and-release problem. Oregon's justice system has increasingly focused on rehabilitation and diversion rather than incarceration for nonviolent offenses. But business owners argue that the balance has swung too far. They say the result is a catch-and-release environment where those responsible for break-ins or assaults rarely face lasting consequences. This system, critics contend, unintentionally trains repeat offenders. Without meaningful deterrence, crimes like burglary or shoplifting become routine. Insurance claims rise, premiums soar, and local commerce suffers. For many, this has created an atmosphere of resignation, an acceptance that help, at least for now, isn't coming from within the city itself. The economic impact. The consequences of Portland's safety crisis go well beyond fear and frustration. Businesses that remain open must shoulder higher insurance rates, additional security costs, and reduced revenue from wary customers. Many policies now include special classifications such as sabotage or malicious attack, driving premiums up by 200 to 300% since 2022. The cost of simply existing as a business in Portland has risen dramatically. Taxes, utility fees, and licensing costs have increased at the same time as crime-related expenses. For smaller operations, restaurants, bars, and shops, the combination can be crushing. Some owners now describe running a business in Portland as paying to survive rather than to grow. A community on edge. The city's progressive ideals, compassion, inclusion, and reform, are being tested by the realities of daily life. Supporters of reform insist that Portland must not abandon its commitment to social justice or criminal rehabilitation. But others argue that those values are meaningless if residents no longer feel safe in their own neighborhoods. The lack of visible enforcement, they say, has eroded trust in government institutions. Even those who oppose federal intervention admit that the city's current approach isn't working. Federal attention returns. For the first time in years, national attention has returned to Portland's public safety crisis. Federal agencies have taken notice, citing rising reports of violent offenses, drug trafficking, and organized theft. The administration insists that the deployment of National Guard troops would not be about taking over the city, but about supplementing overburdened local resources. Officials highlight the example of Washington, D.C., where coordinated federal and local efforts led to a measurable drop in violent crime last year. But Portland's leadership remains wary, remembering the tense confrontations of 2020 when federal agents clashed with protesters. To them, a renewed federal presence risks reopening old wounds. When protection feels political for Portlanders, safety has become politicized in ways that seem distant from daily life. Residents are tired of seeing their struggles turned into talking points. Whether it's graffiti that never gets cleaned up, open-air drug use, or abandoned storefronts, many feel forgotten by the politicians arguing over their fate. Local shop owners say the conversation about progressive values means little when they're cleaning up shattered glass for the third time in a week. For them, the debate isn't about ideology, it's about survival. The breaking point. Recent surveillance footage from a downtown tavern captured the kind of daylight robbery that has become alarmingly common. A gunman entered, held staff at gunpoint, and left with thousands in cash. The incident shook the community, not just because of the violence, but because of how routine such scenes have become. One of the owners, speaking after the event, said she was proud of her staff's courage but feared the emotional aftermath. "I'm worried about how she'll feel when she gets home tonight and realizes a gun was pointed at her," she said. For residents, moments like this highlight the deeper issue: lawlessness in broad daylight, and the sense that the system no longer protects them. The cost of late-stage progressivism. Commentators describe Portland as a case study in what happens when idealism meets the hard edges of reality. The city's desire to humanize justice, expand tolerance, and reduce incarceration has collided with the unintended consequences of permissiveness. When small crimes go unpunished, larger crimes follow. When public spaces are neglected, they become magnets for chaos. And when those trying to build businesses or communities are left to fend for themselves, they eventually leave. Investors and families alike are choosing to relocate, saying Portland has become too unpredictable to risk long-term commitments. Business exodus and rising costs. As businesses close or relocate, the city's tax base shrinks, forcing officials to raise fees and taxes on those that remain. The result is a vicious cycle. Fewer businesses mean fewer services, higher costs, and even greater strain on the remaining residents. Owners who stay cite not optimism but necessity. They can't afford to leave, even as they can barely afford to stay. One restaurateur noted that her utility bills have risen by $1,000 a month, while new state-level fees are adding to the burden. "It's just one thing after another," she said. "We're being squeezed from both sides, crime on one and the government on the other. A divided path forward." There is no consensus on the solution. Some Portlanders welcome federal help, believing that only a strong external force can reset the city's direction. Others fear that the introduction of National Guard troops will escalate tensions and turn neighborhoods into flashpoints of conflict. Many, however, agree on one thing: something has to change. The city can't continue balancing lofty ideals against public safety. The same people who once championed decriminalization and police reform are now asking for more patrols and tougher enforcement. It's a reckoning that strikes at the heart of what Portland wants to be and what it can afford to remain. The human cost of idealism. For decades, Portland's identity was tied to progressivism, creativity, and civic pride. That identity is now under threat, not just from crime, but from disillusionment. The promise of a fairer, more humane city feels hollow when law-abiding citizens fear walking their own streets. Reform was meant to create balance, but for many, it feels like balance has tipped too far. At the same time, residents and community groups continue to work tirelessly to restore hope. Volunteers clean streets, independent security groups patrol neighborhoods, and nonprofits support those affected by homelessness and addiction. In every corner of the city, people are trying to rebuild from the ground up, even as the system above them falters. The federal question: whether President Trump's call to send in the National Guard becomes reality remains to be seen. Such a move would test not only federal authority, but the resilience of Portland's democracy. Supporters argue that decisive action is needed to restore order and protect livelihoods. Opponents warn that turning to the military for domestic policing risks eroding the civil freedoms Portland once stood for. The challenge, as always, lies in finding balance between compassion and consequence, between local control and national responsibility. Conclusion. Portland's crisis is not just about crime, it's about the struggle of a modern American city to reconcile its ideals with its reality. The residents who still believe in Portland's potential are fighting an uphill battle, caught between political rhetoric and lived experience. They need effective leadership, not slogans, security, not speeches. The truth is simple. Without order, even the most visionary ideals collapse. Without justice, neither safety nor fairness can exist. Portland's future depends on leaders who can bridge the divide between principle and pragmatism, restoring a city that once stood as a symbol of progress to one that can again be a safe, thriving home for its people.